as well as today's candidate, Ms. Purnima DeMorais. Did I do good this time?
You did great.
Okay, I did well.
Perfect.
All right. And Purnima joins us. She's currently the interim principal at the North Street School in Tewksbury, an elementary school in Tewksbury. Prior to her time in Tewksbury, she was the principal of the Harmony Grove Elementary School in Framingham, formerly called the Woodrow Wilson School. Ms. DeMorais has her degree from Boston University in both science education and biology and pre-med. She received her Master's of Public Administration from Harvard University, and she is now a doctoral candidate for leadership in urban education at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. We will pass it along to hear about why exactly you would like to be the next principal of David Mindess Elementary School, and also to hear a little bit about what you've been doing in your career.
Great. No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and especially you coming out in the evening to connect day 3. So a lot of stamina involved for day 3. I appreciate that piece. So I've been in education, as you had said, this is my 28th year, and had a journey K through 12. So my journey has been both at the teaching level half and at the administrative level half. So in roles between a science department chair at the high school assistant principal, to assistant principal in a K to 8, to principal in elementary. And so it makes me unique to offer that lens, and I think strategically I did some of that work so I could get a better handle on K through 12 as a trajectory. And to be an effective high school leader or an elementary leader, I think one needs to know the domain and the crossover of what's needed. And I think I bring you the lens of somebody who knows what's needed at the tail end to make sure we do things right at the beginning foundational end, which is the most important. I love the diversity here in Ashland, and I'm really excited about the fact that you're opening up a new building, which is work that I have done in Somerville, unifying 2 schools together, and a lot of the building work and the logistical work that was needed, and the meticulous sort of who goes where and when and scheduling. And so I am a type A sort of science math person, and I love to over communicate and love that challenge, and I love the challenge of having a diverse set of students, and the demographics are definitely changing here, and I want to be part of that work and hopefully support with all the stakeholders.
We're going to open up to our parents.
I'll start, I guess. Kate McDonald again. Within your first 90 days here, how would you plan to engage the teaching staff sort of to ensure that they get your buy-in or commitment to your vision that you see? Or what is your vision, and how to get them to jump on board?
Yeah, so the word me sort of doesn't exist in education. It's a we. So we have to have a collaborative vision, and so I want to honor the work that's been done here. It's a lot of great work, and staff have been here for a long, long time. So I want to honor a lot of the things that are going really well and use a lot of the data to identify areas collaboratively that need support. And so my first 90 days would be listening and just, having a space where staff, in your example, I would say parents as well, but staff can come in and really just get to know me and me get to know them and really understand the needs in their classroom, their historical experiences here. I'm a proponent of a lot of food and music, so let's have coffees together, let's have a breakfast to open up and just, unwind and really get to know one another and dive into an effective and productive school year. So for me, that would be, I would say, the first 90 days of listening, really taking in a lot of the challenges they are facing and making sure they feel heard, and setting up a plan where I love to always give that feedback back. So this is, hey, if I heard correctly, this is what I'm hearing as trends. And so I love to do that work too. So often we'll have conversations, and just to make sure I've heard certain pieces, I like to reiterate those pieces. So at the end of the conversations, here's what I'm hearing from staff. I feel like there's a lot of you that are feeling ABC. Here's things that are going well, what you'd like to continue, and here's maybe a trajectory to make some of the connections together. And so really using the school improvement plan and a lot of the work of opening up a new building, taking that sort of into consideration, laying out a foundation, especially in the summer, to communicate effectively sort of where the school year is heading, and maybe planning things ahead of time that we know can get slotted in already, PD, what that looks like, and early releases, and just, I know what the teaching aspect they want. Teachers want everything early. So if I can provide that landscape to make sure dates are committed, MCAT, all the dates that they need ahead of time, I'm going to do that work in the summer and utilize the 90 days to be visible, to jump into the classroom. Right now in Tewksbury, I have a model where it's a sort of an open policy in my Google Calendar, and so I have offered a Google piece where I've put times of the day that are available for me in the week, and teachers script and let me know what they need. So for some it may be, hey, could you jump in and read a book to the students? For others it may be, hey, we're doing some Eureka math work and I'd love for you to take a small group and tier 2. And so there's no work for me that's like, hey, principal can't do this work. I want to be part of the classroom. And so making those informal connections and allowing teachers to feel really supported. So my 90 days would be filled of, sort of what they would need, and hopefully carry that through in the year. Yeah.
I'll have a follow-up real fast with that. Our whole community, especially Mindess, is a very hands-on. Everyone chips in to do their fair share when there's something needed. Is there an example that you could say that maybe you were willing to chip in a lot or get everyone involved and excited for? So, because that's the way our community is here.
Yeah, I can go through the community programming I've done, and that might be a little bit longer example, but it'll touch on some of the parent outreach. And I apologize, you've had to hear this twice now, but for me, this was like a big landscape of learning. And the one culminating piece, if I can look back into Framingham, that really came into fruition. So beginning my journey as a principal in Framingham, family involvement was difficult. Families were working, they didn't really know how to connect, and sometimes it was a sacrifice. Do we come in on a Thursday at 6 for a parent outreach PTO traditional night, or do I have a meal cooked as a mother at home? So there were some difficult decisions. And coming back to your question of chipping in, so morph the model from a PTO, traditional model, to a community gathering. And so I involved a lot of the partners of Framingham Jewish Family Services, YMCA, worked with our school council and our teachers, and really put together a collaborative model where parents would walk into one night in the month where first and foremost they'd have food, and they had a dinner, waiting for them, hot meal and a culturally hot meal. So we had a lot of Brazilians in Framingham, love Brazilian food myself. And so I worked with a lot of the padarias and other authentic sort of places for Brazilian food. And we offered a Brazilian dinner for parents one night a month. And between that and babysitting, as well as tutoring for students currently in school, and a non-intrusive area where they could pick up backpacks, coats, food items, and just carry and go, no questions asked, as well as headsets where they would get interpretation. I do speak many languages myself, but to meet the needs of the families. And we created an experience that people needed to chip in that was a little bit above and beyond sort of their scheduled day. And so teachers went above and beyond. They offered tutoring in the nights for kids. They made the phone call home, to engage families and bring them into these gatherings. Working together with Jewish Family Services and other pieces to get the food. And it was a community event that really brought us together. And by the third year, we had 250 plus parents that we couldn't fit in our cafetorium, we called it, because it was a cafeteria auditorium together. And it was bustling with parents. And it was a really heartwarming piece to be in at the end of the third year. So, yeah.
Was the diversity, which I'm really proud of. So I was wondering, what does diversity mean to you? And what are programs that you've created to show the inclusivity on the student level and at the administration level?
Yeah, really great question. I think the time that we live in, I always talk about when you open up the news, it's so confusing as an adult to look at what we're looking at and to really process a lot of what's going on in the world. I can only imagine for kids, the confusion. And so when we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, that starts first and foremost with the curricular pieces that we are offering students. And so Is our library filled with resources that are fitting to the world that we're in? Or are they sort of narrow-minded? So we've got to open our horizons to different cultures and perspectives and offer kids that experience, especially for students who don't have that traveling experience at all. So let's start through reading and through literacy and promote some of that work. One initiative I did have is to offer a school book of choice. And so we worked as a staff together. And Alvin Ho, which is from Diary of the Wimpy Kid, right now in Tewksbury, we agreed upon as a staff that that would be a really engaging book for all of our students to read. It talks about mental health. It also talks about cultural diversity. And so that was a kid-friendly way of unpacking some difficult conversations that needed to be had. And so curricular pieces are huge. I think if you want to be inclusive, you've got to meet parents and families for where they're at. And that means providing scaffolding of languages with any interpretation and any outreach that goes out. So being in Framingham, we use Blackboard, which was a quick email, phone text, and phone call in many different languages, as well as Facebook and Twitter and other resources and languages that are appropriate for families. Also making the personal connections, I think, really, really important. So if you want inclusivity, again, the outreach needs to be multifolded, and that's really, really important. I think one other piece is really looking at our hiring practices and retaining and finding candidates of color, that represent our student bodies and diverse aspects. And so I think that's easier said, but working with colleges and recruiting student teachers that will be willing to stay onwards and be part of the family and trajectory of the work. So that is also really important. One last piece, and I can go on with this topic, it's a passionate topic of mine. When you think about the diverse aspect of everything that we do, it's really throwing ourselves in difficult conversations. And so as a principal, as a leader, and I would say teachers are our leaders as well, when you've got students in conflict, using that as an opportunity to really having that critical dialogue with kids and unpacking some of the word choices and some of the nuances that we may take for granted, but really being reflective and giving ourselves that opportunity to reflect as a PD and staff, but giving students that opportunity to have discourse and make sure that what they're saying is very inclusive and safe, and reminding students of what is acceptable and what is not. So really using that opportunity. So all faceted. Thank you.
I'll go next. So can you explain a little bit about your leadership style and how, as the administrator of the building, that you would go ahead and build a cohesive environment between all of the different facets of the school, between general education, inclusive classrooms, separate classrooms, what we call specialized programming here, paraprofessionals, teachers, related service providers. How do you create a community here in the school as the administrator?
So I think that's a super question, by the way. A couple of facets to that question. I would think as you're looking at, I love the mission here, first of all, in Ashland, every minute, every hour, every student, all the time. That's the goal here. And so we're all committed to that goal of really maximizing time on learning for students and an equitable experience for kids. And so first and foremost, it's putting students first in everything that we do. I think that's super important. And I think for creating a culture, reminding us that we're all in it together for that, to see us collaboratively work through some difficult discussions and come out together and as a family. And so I'm family oriented in my background as well, and that's my philosophy in school. I'm a collaborative person. I want to work with stakeholders. There's not a me, there's a we. And it's a three-legged stool. You've got parents, for me, as a huge part of the learning and connection at home, which is a huge portion of the student day. You've got, the teachers that we have, and then we've got our kids. And so working together, reminding us of those three pieces and those pillars, working together, you've got to create a culture where staff feel safe to take risks, to talk about their teaching and learning, where kids can bounce back from a situation that they've had difficulty in and be resilient, and giving them an opportunity to come back to the classroom and where parents feel heard and there's a place that they can come to. And so that's going to definitely bring us together, and over communicating in terms of the diverse aspects of our school. So finding ways to, right now in the past, in Framingham, I had a collaborative newsletter for staff, and that was my way of offering, here's a coaching section, an admin section, ELD coach wanting to provide a little bit of tidbits, and every Sunday I would send that out, food for thought for staff, and often links, and that was their PD sort of for the week to catch them up to date. And I believe that provided a lot of the inclusivity. It was, here are some special ed techniques that are really, might want to think about. And so everybody contributed to that, the leaders, I would say, of the building contributed to that newsletter, and it went out every Sunday, and it was an opportunity for the week to really look at and continue PD. It was not hey, we're going to have a PD day, but it was educators looking at tidbits and finding out, great things going on in the school and creating that balance and that communication.
Can you describe for me a little bit of your background in managing or overseeing or being the administrator of sub-separate classrooms? Or, how different districts do it differently. We're a vertical district. We don't have neighborhood schools. As many of our kids here in district are here in this school. And so I know in other districts it's not the same. So you could just...
Yeah, no, great question. I've been in an inclusive setting my entire life. And so that means, inclusion within the classrooms, certain pullouts at times a day, and substantially separate. So seeing sort of all the models sort of in school right now in Tewksbury, we do have a little bit of all three. And so there are times of day where we've got a substantially separate classroom, high behavioral needs, and sort of all the needs where the kids are there pretty much housed, I would say 80% of their day, 20% they do branch out to certain parts of their day in other places. And then we've got inclusion, of course, 504s and IEPs implemented. And my goal is to, of course, work with all stakeholders to make sure we're maximizing on the least restricted environment for students, where they have an opportunity to grow. I always look at it this way, if you want to teach empathy, the best way to do it is immersing kids together. There's something to be said where I just had an incident this morning, so it's fresh in my mind if I can share it with you, with a student who's severely autistic and has a bit of Down syndrome, and touching students and behaving in certain ways during recess, and the kids felt unsafe. They lashed out, and it was an opportunity for me now to work together with kids. And I had an open circle with students in my office, and we talked about how this student was a little different, and what could they do to sort of work together and empathize together with these differences and feel safe at the same time. I talked to that student with their aide as well, separately, and then brought them all together and found ways to have that discussion. And so there's something to be said with, when you preach empathy, kids it goes here, but when you allow them to immerse in an experience and dialogue about what they could have done or what could be better or how things are different and what can they do to work with one another, it was a whole different scenario. And so it's really going through and having time to do that work and the dialogue that's needed to make a more cohesive environment for kids.
Purnima, you talked earlier in response to Kate's question about your 90-day plan, and that makes great sense. You've had an opportunity over the last couple of weeks when you were invited back into this process to do a little bit of learning as well, diving into some of the data that's existing, in documents and on the website and, assessment data. I'm just interested to know the mission of schools really is to teach and learn, right? But what all that encompasses. What did you learn about the gifts that are presently existing in the Mindess Elementary School and the gifts yet to be unwrapped? What are the opportunities that you saw when you did your data review?
Great, yeah, great question. I want to recognize the great growth that's occurred with students, and I see the demographics as probably one that needs to be focused on, because you've got a changing demographic of a larger population of L students who are coming on board, special needs students. And so this is a growing school as well. So the numbers are growing as well. And for me, it's one thing that's standing out is what are we doing in terms of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 instruction? What can we do to maximize learning for everybody? What can we do to utilize the staff that we currently have to make sure all kids are accelerating? And so I think that the data point for me, the demographics are definitely one piece that stood out for me. So you've got the demographics changing, and you've got a building coming on board, and there's a lot of change. And so to keep the growth going as well as the stability is going to be important, but at the same time recognizing the diverse needs of kids.
So the last 2 years, the pandemic has shown us a lot of things, especially students. You had created any programs to help close the gap between students who were left behind during the pandemic process versus those who are meeting the standard needs?
Yeah, great question. I think the pandemic for some has been a blessing for certain students. You know, there's a population that have thrived, you know, with less distractions and sort of maximizing the technology piece, and they've done really well. And for the most part, others that the socialization has really taken a toll, and the lack of organized structure, and just having teachers and being part of the classroom. So with that said, we've looked at several models in Tewksbury right now of opening up tutoring before school for kids and families, and instead of having teachers doing certain duties, that is their duty. So we've offered the tutoring aspect of come in and their contractual time, and instead of going to the cafeteria, we've used support staff or admin to do that work, but really allowing teachers to have time with the kids to close the gap. Also working with certain families to offer Chromebooks at home, which we're not a one-to-one yet, but certain kids who may not have that technology aspect and they really thrived from it, it's making sure that they have the equipment they need and the programming they need at that level. So we've definitely done our homework and looking at certain kids and their high needs and tailoring supports as well that way. And I would say, just looking within the classroom and creating those opportunities and connections to, right now it's all about stamina, right? So for kids who were immersed in schooling and the traditional, if COVID never happened, it would have been probably a different scenario. And now they've got times where they need to get up and take those movement breaks. They need to do mindfulness sort of work, and you've got to recognize that work. And so really offering rich PD around that social emotional work so we can support the kids. So done a lot of the work with staff to meet the staff where they are in terms of their cell needs, offering them yoga after school. I'm yoga certified, so I'm the one teaching at the end of the day if you want to come in for some breathing and some a good workout and stretching. And so done that work with staff, and trickled sort of the mindfulness work with kids. Every Thursday I go on the loudspeaker, and in the morning we start our day with mindfulness and breathing, and I take in some of their feedback and what they liked and what they didn't like as students. And so we use some of the common dialogue for the work to recenter, restart, and take a breather and de-escalate. And so we've got some keywords that we're using. I believe that's definitely closed some of the gap as well. Just recognizing that COVID has taken a toll on our personal mental health, as educators, as well as our kids and our families, and working with that piece and building up their stamina and toolkit to handle some of the issues that we're facing.
All right, thank you.
Can you describe for me your approach to having a difficult conversation with a parent?
Yeah, so which I've had many, and I want to be their listener. So I always love to start off a conversation with sort of the why we're here, depending on the scenario. So, hey, Mrs. Murphy, I know you're here to discuss the needs of Johnny and some of the concerns that you have. Know that I'm your ally, and we're going to work through a difficult conversation. And I'm here to listen to you, and we're going to walk out with a plan to support you. And I always want to frame it that way, so the parent knows, and it's an authentic piece of that I'm there for them. And I think right there, people go from here to here as parents, as individuals. So, okay, so you're walking in, you're going to listen to me, and I want to listen truly to them and hear their perspective. Often what I do find is, their student will go home and there's a whole different perspective from the student, and the parent has that perspective. They may not have a teacher perspective on the issue. So I want to hear the whole situation out, and then if it is hey, teacher feels this way, student feels this way, I'm going to follow up with the teacher and get back to the parent. And so we'll iron out some pieces, but for me, the conversation is very much listening, and then I like to give them a time frame of my communication. You've let me know this piece. Obviously, if there's a high needs and there's a safety issue, my communication is going to be a lot faster. If there's hey, this is an academic piece, it's going to take a little time to process with the teacher. I will, and I'll get back to you in 24 hours, and they'll get my phone call. So I'm there to listen and to hear their data points and not make judgments or conclusions. Perceptions sometimes are reality, so I want to make sure that, if they feel like a teacher is not supporting them for whatever reason, that could become a reality in their mind. And so my way to resolve that situation is to bridge the gap and to make sure we communicate effectively. And that could mean a teacher coming in with a parent and me facilitating a difficult conversation. But bridging and making sure that we're, at the end of the day, supporting the student.
Thank you.
You mentioned a minute ago, or a question ago, about the mental health and the after the pandemic, and we've seen this all across the board. We've noticed an increase of maybe bullying and mental health issues. How would you deal with that, or do you have any suggestions that you bring to Tewksbury that you would implement here to help with this increasing problem that we've been seeing?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. The mental health piece is at the forefront of our work as educators, and we just have to recognize that. There were different challenges in the 80s, there were 90s, and right now this is at the first and foremost piece right now, the social emotional piece for staff, for families, for kids. So we've just got to recognize that, and as strange as that feels or sits, I think looking at the data, really looking at the mental health data in the country, looking at rates of increasing numbers of depression, trauma, and potential suicide in high school. And so this trajectory of, we've got elementary students, we definitely don't want to get them at that piece, and we want to be proactive. And so a lot of the work that I do is proactive work. Like I started saying, SEL is not a one block of the day. It's time all day. And so offering teachers the toolkit to really look out for, I call them the yellow zones. So let's not wait till a student gets to a red piece of, like, we're on high alert now. If you see, Mary with her head down, and that's not usually Mary, and this is a really extroverted Mary, now she's in the yellow zone. And so we want to get her to a green, calmer place. And so using that same language with families, and just really being proactive and knowing our kids, building those relationships, having an adult that every student can go to. And so for me, I have right now an anonymous box in the main office for kids to just pop in, hey, I have this concern. If they feel like putting their name, they can. I'm going through this piece. Ms. D, could you come in and see me, and whatever, or so-and-so has been giving me a hard time, or classroom number whatever. There's some issues happening. I just want you to be aware, with no name. I'm okay with that. So I always want to give kids that voice and piece of, if they see, a breakdown somewhere, let's not be a bystander, let's not be a victim, let's not be the aggressor. Let's really talk about situations before they happen. And so students have to feel safe to do that, and many kids do. There's something that happened on the bus. Could we talk about it? Absolutely. Come on in. That is the goal, to create that safe zone where students know they can go to you, they can go to an adjustment counselor. Here are their mechanisms of communication. Whether it's a small ticket in the office to seek some help, or whether it's, finding an adjustment counselor during the day, and teachers being okay with giving kids that break and space to deflate, having those conversations. So I think it's a wide toolkit of pieces that I could potentially bring here. It's the looking out for signs, like I said, of the yellow zone, which is really, really important to do. Once kids are at a red, there's a whole different level of interventions now that are needed, and we want to get them in yellow, and that means reaching out to families, working with adjustment counselors, potentially talking to their therapist, or reaching out to get them therapy, to creating that safe knit where they can dialogue about difficult situations and navigate sort of pieces. If somebody did say this to you, what could you have done differently? Here's building up their toolkit as well. And so offering that PD to staff, I think, is really, really important. Often we talk about it, but what does de-escalation look like for staff? What could they do in their classroom? What's a calming corner? Every classroom should have that piece of, a student that needs a break and here's some headphones, whatever is needed, a corner in their classroom where they're safe to take a break. Having an adult that they can go to. And our school climate survey is all telling at the end of the year. For me, the most important question is, do you feel connected to an adult in school as a student? Do you feel safe? And so if there's an overabundance of, I really don't feel connected, there's a lot of work to be done. And so my goal is to be ahead of that piece, knowing that it's, we've had COVID, and it has taken a toll on students and engagement and excitement about coming to school, attendance, a lot of factors. So just being really mindful and proactive in terms of family engagement, professional development for our staff, and creating opportunities for kids to also have their voice heard.
Great, thanks.
I just thought of one. Fast forward a year ahead to fall 2023, so a year from this fall. You have this awesome opportunity to bring together kiddos and staff and parents in the community, 3 different occasions to celebrate success. What's an indicator of success? What are you going to share with them? So at the end of your first year around the sun, what's successful to you? What's the definition of success at the end of that first year for the school, for the students, for the faculty and staff, for the families?
Yeah, I talked about the relationship piece is big. So engagement to me is really, really important. So in our surveys, whatever they look like, feedback from parents to staff to kiddos, do they feel connected and are they excited about coming to school? That's success for me. That's number one. Like, they are energized, they feel engaged, they feel like they can trust an adult. Our staff feel like they've got somebody they can go to for their own growth. And so we want to create that synergy and energy. And so that's through a lot of the feedback that we can get. I think that's really important. Attendance is really big. If you're not present, you're not part of the learning. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area. And so making sure our kids are coming to school, they're coming on time, they're fed, they are feeling part of the community, and their attendance is here. So and that takes a lot of work. That's every week work, every day work, making phone calls and making connections and making sure that we've got all kids in an area that they are coming into the building. And then, of course, looking at our academic pieces and moving the needle. For me, every student should be growing. What that growth looks like may be different for certain kids, but there should be growth in all areas for all kids. And that's our job. And to figure out what is needed to create the maximum growth in those opportunities, and really reflecting about our curriculum and really being reflective as teachers and finding different strategies and working together with administration to move the needle a little bit more. And then I would say the fun experiences for our families and kids. There's a lot of things that go on as part of their experiences. The academic piece is important, but when you leave 5th grade, you want to come out saying, hey, I really remember the bowling night we had as a community, whatever it was, the ice cream social we did, or those shared community gatherings are super important. They bring us together. So that would be an indicator as well.
Well, we're only a small group in the room with you tonight. There's definitely a lot of conversation going on in the community. A lot of people are curious about the candidates and have been watching from home. And in some of my talks with people recently, one thing that has come up on more than one occasion is that people have noticed some of your more recent roles have been for a short length of time, and then you've moved into new roles. So I was hoping that you could give us a little insight into those recent roles and the length of time you spent in those roles and what has been the cause to move on to the next role.
Yeah, no, great. Absolutely transparent question. Some of the pieces have been strategic, like I said, to gain that K through 12 perspective. Others, in full disclosure, I have gone through a pretty difficult divorce several years ago, and that has caused me to move out of a certain area and community to a new beginning. And I'm remarried and very happy, and it's many years from now that's happened. So at the personal level, just that piece of empathy I would ask for. There's things that happen in life, and so that has caused me to change a few of the roles as well, but I am here for the long run. For my most recent change, I predicted that I would stay in Tewksbury for a long time. You know, I'm the interim principal, and they're opening up a new building and consolidating sort of grade levels. That building was supposed to open as of September. It's opening in December, so there's a lot of uncertainty with positions and navigating sort of those waters, and I would really love to be in a place where there's stability, that I could stay here for the long run, because somebody who has maybe had a few roles, we are actually looking for this piece, and I just want to be, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I want to be in this role for a very, very long time. And so to me, this, the community of Ashland is absolutely perfect. I go grocery shopping here to, there's an Indian temple that I visit here all the time, the Lakshmi Temple, and I'm here like every week. And I just love the diverse aspect of being here. And I come to you with a lot of experience of opening and merging schools and buildings and all of the legwork that's involved in that piece as well.
Another piece on your resume that is interesting is that your doctorate work is in urban education, and we are not quite urban here. So how do you feel that that degree would serve you in this community?
Yeah, great question. So urban, to me, they have defined, which expanded my horizons. It's not necessarily being in the city.
Okay.
It's a changing demographic. And so for me, I think the lens of looking at learners from diverse backgrounds, that culturally responsive teaching aspect of our work, engaging in families that are from different backgrounds, I think is a huge asset in the lens that I've learned along the way. My work is right now looking at music and looking at how music and art coming together, or STEAM, let's say, kids with STEAM in their background having a significant STEAM experience, they're likely to excel academically later on. And so that's my sort of doctoral piece and work. And I think that's a great lens to bring, urban, suburban, or wherever. And so the professors have been amazing and sort of providing that lens. But urban, the definition of urban has expanded to just a changing demographic. And I think that that lens is definitely one that can work here.
I'll ask a quick one. I'll ask lots of questions. We bring a lot of enrichments to our school, and the STEM that the kids like and enjoy, and that's memories that they really, going back, got to make Pringle rings. Is there anything that you bring to like encourage the teachers to have these enrichments for the kids, so they have these, hand, moments or anything, or help support that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm so excited already. I'm jumping before you finish your question. So for me, hands-on learning is the most important aspect of our work, because at the end of the day, students walk out not remembering, their algebraic sort of pieces, but they remember, oh my God, that activity that we did in math that brought it all together. And why does one subject area have to be so fragmented? So if you've got math here and writing here, there's components of things coming together. And let's make those connections live. Let's make our learning live and involve the community. So I'd love to, if the staff is open to this and parents are open, perhaps having a culminating activity in grade 5 where you bring the community together, students actually research something really interesting and come up with a proposal and write about it. And it's part of, let's look at water sampling, or let's look at, just anything going on in the community that they're passionate about. Research that piece, present that piece, work with maybe a mentor in the community, which is the work that I've done in Framingham. As an IB school, our grade 5 students had a culminating activity, and you could see learning just coming to life. And why not create those opportunities throughout their elementary experience? So whether it's a smaller piece of involving, community aspects of their learning, to hands-on pieces. So I'm definitely all for ideas, and I love sharing ideas. And so love to create a smorgasbord for teachers to share some of their work and to be in each other's classrooms and collaborate on some of the work as well. And to bring us a little bit closer and make sure that kids really see why they're learning certain aspects, and their commitment to learning becomes totally different.
Great, thanks.
All right, now I remember, sorry about that. So in your earlier responses, you had talked about feedback, receiving feedback from your students when you were talking about the mindful messages or feedback for your anonymous box. So I'm wondering, how do you receive feedback from the administration and parents? And then how often do you touch base with them to make sure that to make sure that everyone is feeling good with the process, or you as an upcoming principal?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If I'm expecting, myself to give some feedback, I definitely need it as well. And so for me, it's important having the informal, let's start with parents, conversations. And so I always like to leave a meeting with, do you feel like you were heard? Is there anything you'd like to share with me that we could have done differently? So even those tidbits along the way of so many conversations in the year go a long way, and being really reflective myself as a leader. And so those informal conversations are very important to me. And I would say having an anonymous survey for parents to fill out and just feel, what can we do to learn a little bit better? Could I communicate a little bit better? Do you like the s'mores, or do you appreciate this piece? Or I want to gauge families to meet them where they're at. So those pieces are really important. I would say for the supervisors above me, Amy Bright, who is assistant superintendent in Framingham, has taught me so much along the way. She's given me critical feedback in lots of areas, and I'm here to grow. She worked hand in hand in schools. She was part of my teaching and learning, and she was part of the visibility piece, and she's like, try this in another way. I think this might be a little bit better. Tell me how you did. And so I'm very much open to coaching. I think, for me, I talked about Michelle Obama's book, and I'm going to bring it up again. I'm a total fan of hers, so I'm going to just put her out there, and she's not paying me for this. She's got a book, and she just published it recently, called Becoming. And so one question Oprah asked her in her interview was, why did you title this Becoming? And she said, because we always ask students, what do you want to become when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? As if growing up is this finite, you're done. You're a doctor, you're an engineer, you graduate, and you're done. We're all learning. And so for me, receiving feedback is part of my work and growth. And so I have that everyday piece to grow in as well. And so I'm totally open to that piece, and I want to work together.
This question goes directly with that. What's next for you? What are you excited to learn about? What is something that you're struggling with professionally, or that you're like, this is next for me? I really want to get grounded in this. I think this next opportunity this is what I'm going to seek growth in.
Yeah, so I think I've done a lot of learning in the ELL world, but there's so much more to do. And I think the growing population and demands of ELL learners being at all different levels too. So you've got kids who are coming into the country with some English, some little English, literacy looking differently. And so really unpacking and making sure, is that a special ed issue, or is that an ELL issue, or what's kind of going on with students? So I want to learn more about that piece and dive into some more work of supporting our ELL learners. That's definitely an area for me that I'm interested in. And you kind of touched upon this in terms of your project-based learning. What can we do to really expand those smaller opportunities to large scale, but really involve our community in some of these pieces and make them meaningful? When we offer certain projects to kids or homework to kids, really being reflective about what are we trying to get at here. And we know that engagement and time for students are challenging, so really being thoughtful and mindful about the work we're presenting to kids and what we're trying to get across. So that's something that excites me, and I want to definitely pursue a little bit more of.
Can you explain your philosophy on discipline and how you would go about it? And also in light of children who might have an IEP, maybe a behavioral plan in place, and then on top of that, there's a discipline issue.
Sure. So I'm going to bring you to a metaphor. How's that? To India. So my last visit to India was a while ago, but I was fascinated watching this clay pot maker on the road. And this was as we're walking the streets of Delhi. And so this man had sort of one hand pretty firm and the other hand shaping sort of the pot. And I would say that is my philosophy. Let me go into that a little bit. So having the firmness of certain conversations with kids, because they need that structure and they need natural consequences. So if it's an over-the-top consequence, it really doesn't resonate with the kid and doesn't really produce anything. If they're throwing things in the cafeteria, a natural consequence would be, I think you're going to help clean up a little bit in the cafeteria because that's what makes sense. So not let me suspend you for 2 days, which there's no link to the piece that just took place. So to me, having that firmness is really important, but that opportunity to dialogue and come back. And I think that takes work. Having restorative conversations for staff oftentimes is a miss. And that's important work that we need to do as administrators. So if there is a staff who's had an issue with a student, do they have time to heal that conversation? Because they're about to welcome that student back. And have they had that conversation, hey, this is what happened. Did you apologize? What have you learned from it? Having a couple of moments before the student enters the room to restore. I think that's really important. Now you talked about special ed, of course. Looking at the lens of certain students and certain behaviors, I have to ask myself each time, is this a manifestation of their disability? Or, was this something that they could have controlled and they need to see consequence? Regardless, there's got to be a consequence, whether it's a conversation. So when we think about consequences, it's very punitive, and I think I work with staff to expand their notion of, I don't really like the word actually, consequence, but what's a natural outcome to this behavior? So whether it's a quick conversation, whether it's a letter of apology, whether, things don't have to be, let me just displace you from the classroom. In fact, my goal is to bring the student back and to make sure that they don't miss time on learning. But to really, of course, look at the empathetic lens of a disability and to work through those pieces and to make sure, like I described this morning, the student who had a severe disability acting out, and it was a physical piece, and his consequence was a conversation and a dialogue. And so making sure that, I'm making those connections.
Thank you. And can you give me a real-world example of a time where one of your staff members was not kind of up to par on maybe best practices in dealing with a student issue of any sort, and how you then approached the staff member about it and led them through, a process to kind of either create PD or kind of help them grow as a staff member, because it's not always about, is it the student who's having the issue? Sometimes it is that our staff is just not, because not for no fault of their own, they've never encountered this before, and they need to grow. And so how do you approach that?
So I can describe an issue that recently took place a couple of months ago in Tewksbury, where I had a parent who came in with a significant concern about a staff, I want to say yelling pretty loudly at a student and making them feel quite uncomfortable for a behavior they were exhibiting. And she felt that the student was very embarrassed and it shouldn't have been this way. And for me, I wanted to open up and just understand the situation a little bit more. So I did call the student into my office, got their perspective, obviously spoke to the parent, got their perspective, and then separately spoke to the teacher. And luckily I had a teacher who was pretty open and just open to what took place. And she reported, I lost my cool because this was like the 6th acting out or burst of the day, and I just could not hold myself together, and I did. I sort of lashed out at the student and said, you need to, whatever the words were used, and reflecting, kind of going back, I could have done it in another way. And so I modeled sort of pieces for her and sort of gave her a toolkit for what she could do in that situation. And my philosophy is always, if a teacher needs support, call a student support staff, like we're here for you. If you need a break, or if you've got a difficult situation, don't, just control your pieces, because we're the role models for the students. And so providing her that lens, as well as, luckily we've got a behavior coach as well. So she's going to be working with the teacher also to create that. And then to full circle, she had an opportunity to dialogue with the parent and repair that relationship and rework and restart and repair it with the students and acknowledge, as at the end of the day, there are thousands of decisions being made with educators all day. From what book do we read? What do I do with Johnny who's acting out? How do I connect to home? There's recess. There's there 1,000 decisions. We're human beings at the end of the day, but we need to sort of hold ourselves together if we're feeling like we're in the yellow zone. And so we've got to work and do that work and identify our needs earlier. And so it was a lot of aftermath and working with the teacher and coaching, and there's a huge area of growth for her.
Thank you.
We probably have time for one more.
Can you speak about your approach to testing and assessments? Students are asked a lot of times to take a pre-test before a unit and a post-test after, and then we enter into the standardized testings, the MCAS, and it can add up a lot on a student's plate. We need to get the data, but we also need to make sure that they're not being too stressed about that. So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, so there's some we have to, because we're a public school, and those pieces are important. And then there are the formatives that we discuss ahead of time as a district and really think about, what's important at the end of the day. Is this the unit test? What does it look like? I would argue we're assessing all day. It's not just these tests. It's, here, thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you think of this piece? Or turn and talk. Or let me find some anecdotal data and see how students are doing. Conferencing with kids and setting goals for them. So I think there is a balance that's needed, and things that could be traditionally cut, we might have to, in terms of pre and post, and certain things that make sense to stay because they're arranged in a certain way to give educators an informational piece for students. Those are important. So it's really looking into here's what we have to do, here's what our district is saying sort of that's important, and they've done that work, and then here's at the teacher discretion and how much we're doing of this work, and really what are we getting out of it? Are we really getting some data, and is that driving their instruction and their reflection and their teaching? And so just being mindful of not doing too much. I think movement breaks are huge, an important part of our work, being open to what breaks look like. So whether that's going outside for 5 minutes or stretching out, or I talk about breathing all the time, and so making sure that we allow kids to have the stamina that they need to do their best work as well. So it's definitely a fine balance, but that's not extra work. It's part of our day.
Anybody have one last one if you'd like? So for consistency's sake, I'll give you the last question that I asked the other two candidates. As a principal, you are coming into contact with stakeholders on a regular basis, but the three most important stakeholders are students, staff, and parents. If we were to talk to the folks that you've worked with, how would the students describe you, how would the parents describe you, and how would your staff describe you?
Oh boy. Okay. So here's, I'm going to be really reflective about this. For students, they would say she is definitely fair, and she's here for our safety, and she listens, and she's here to support us. I think kids feel very supported. In fact, coming to Tewksbury, several of them have reported, we feel really great coming to your office, and we feel like you've heard us, and this helped me repair this relationship, or I'm touched by those conversations. So I think fairness in terms of my approach to dealing with conflict and really making sure that they're feeling safe and heard is really important. I think for families, I've been blessed with really engaging them at a different level of work. And so many times they report just feeling grateful for me, going above and beyond sort of my lens of looking at the work that, or the lens of family connections, and making sure that equitable lens is there. And so making sure that they feel heard, they feel welcomed to the building, their needs are being met. So I would say grateful, in one way. And for my staff, I would say resilient, somebody who we've gone through some hurdles together, and we're looking at some challenging pieces, and we're growing. And so I think that's nothing is easy, right? You've got to slam down to get up again in the morning, and to, the work that we do is a constant refined work. And so some days are great, and some days are, oh my God, everything we just thought of just went out the door. And so we've got to refine and regroup and be resilient. And that opportunity to be reflective and to bounce back and to keep growing is really, really important. I think they would say that she's somebody who gets us in terms of our social emotional learning, and she supports our personal needs, and has a growth mindset herself, and is somebody who's resilient in terms of the school and bringing us together as a culture.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to all of you for joining us tonight. We will give you one last chance here to wrap up and give us some closing thoughts before we say goodnight to the community.
So I appreciate your time, day 3. Like I said, you've got stamina to do this work, and I want to assure you that I am going to give it my 200%. So I will dive into really getting to know the community, the kiddos, and our staff. And, I hope there's no me, there's a we, that we collaborate and, bring the school to, it's already doing great, so to an even better level. And that means over-communicating, being a little bit more creative in the way we do business in terms of teaching and learning and making those connections for kids, and making sure the demographics that are changing for our families, that we are supporting them in every way possible. So I would love to be part of this family, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us and watching. That wraps it up. That's 3 of 3, so we're done. Thank you again for being here tonight. Thank you, Purnima.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Thanks.